Mr. Akshay Bam, the faculty of this institute, and above all, dear students, I am overwhelmed by the very generous introductions, both by Mr. Bam and by the compeers. Certainly undeserved, but very nice to hear early on a Friday morning. Let me at the outset congratulate all of you under the leadership of Akshay Bam, undoubtedly with the benevolence and the blessings of his mother, that he has created this huge institution in Indore. It's not only the size and the infrastructure, but the spirit which animates such good deeds. And doubtless it must be because of the blessings of his elders, apart, of course, from the sterling hard work and dynamism of Mr. Bam. I'm also very happy to learn that Justice M.R. Shah is associated with this, one of our most hard-working judges, and I can tell you that he has sacrificed a large chunk of his family life in the discharge of his duty to the Supreme Court. Friends, mooting is an excellent way to hone your skills as a lawyer. In our times when we joined the profession, such opportunities were there, but the platforms were fewer, the opportunities were fewer, the competitive formats were far less, and the exposure was more limited. It is but natural, I'm talking of 40 years ago. Mooting brings out so many qualities of a lawyer, but in particular, something which you might not have noticed, it underlines differences between a good lawyer and a good advocate. A difference which some of you may treat as a difference without a distinction or a distinction without a difference. No, to be one is not necessarily to be the other. To be the latter is not necessarily to be the former, or vice versa. Historically, two examples come to my mind of two renowned persons of law, renowned. One was Setalvad. Of course, I call him Setalvad Jr. because his father was also a renowned pre-independence lawyer. But Motilal Setalvad was a solid lawyer. He was deep in knowledge of law, industrious, hardworking. He would make each point of law, labor it without necessarily rhetoric or flamboyance. A great lawyer, undoubtedly. A direct opposite, a great advocate. I would not call Setalvad such a great advocate as he was a lawyer. In a direct contrast, I would not call Daftari as good a lawyer as he was an advocate, Chandu Daftari. Daftari believed in minimum work and maximum output. But the art of putting across a point pithily, succinctly, pointedly, and driving it home with minimum effort is also the art of advocacy, along with being a great lawyer. There are many anecdotes about Daftari, possibly more than anybody else, but one of the two famous ones are when in the late 60s, maybe late 60s or early 70s, he was arguing a matter under the Gambling Act. And the bench in the Supreme Court asked him, but Mr. Daftari, how do you define gambling? So Daftari, in his inimitable style, paused and they said, my lords, it's a very difficult word to define. But the best way to explain it to your lordships is that perhaps what you do when you decide miscellaneous matters on Mondays and Fridays, that is the best and the closest definition of a gamble which a lawyer can give. The bench burst out laughing, but it made the point. He was also the man who was extremely witty and is supposed to have explained while arguing a matter of liquor policy. He said, though I am defending for the petitioners the consumption of liquor, I must tell you, a republic without a pub is a relic. That's also attributed during course of arguments to Chandu Daftari. Of course, there's a rare combination of a great lawyer and a great advocate, which is what Nani Palkiwala was. His advocacy skills were remarkable, extraordinary, and as a lawyer also he was superb. And any of you who care to read the development of the basic structure argument, from Golaknath where he lost to Keshwanand where he succeeded by a wafer-thin majority of 7-6, will tell you how he picked up basic concepts of philosophy from elsewhere, delved deep in research, and then fashioned them with acute insight and remarkable advocacy into the basic structure doctrine by which we invented as India, the only country in the world to have invented the doctrine that even a constitutional amendment passed by two-thirds of parliament can be declared unconstitutional. What an amazing doctrine. Also, of course, the main bulwark against absolute or continuing dictatorship ever. Well, friends, that is just a word about a good lawyer and a good advocate. Of course, the fact that so many of you are gathered, and Akshay tells us the large numbers studying at this institute, but so many of you gathered for mooting, it is, of course, assumed that most, if not all of you, will join law. I must tell you another insight between the time when I joined law practice and today. If someone were to ask me what is the biggest differences between my joining 40 years ago and now, I would pinpoint three. Of course, different people can have different differences. I would pinpoint three remarkable ones which you all know but which have gone unnoticed and non-underlined. One, in my days, law was a refuge of last resort. Today, it is an option of first choice. That's not a small thing. You take it for granted, but you have to see those eras when you would try the IAS, you would try politics, you would try services, you would try this, that, and when you failed everywhere, you would go for law. Now it is an option of first choice. Number two, in those days, you still had people with some connection with law being the ones whom were most inclined to law. Family of lawyers, grandfather, great-grandfather, or judges, etc., etc. Today, you'll be surprised at the number of architects' families, engineer families, doctor families, even industrialists I know with a large industry, whose progeny have not only taken to law, studied law, but want to practice law. Top doctors. That is another great change and a great future for law. The third single most important change by times is that the number, the quality, and the presence of lady lawyers at every stage, from the bottom to just below the top, has increased exponentially and humongously. And they are doing extremely well. Certainly, lady lawyers were not doing that well at different levels 40 years ago. I will leave out the very, very top because it takes a few generations to move there. But leaving aside the very top of the top, just below that and right down to the bottom level, ladies at every level are much larger in numbers, doing well, and expanding and prospering. Well, friends, let me start on a lighter note that on the assumption that most of you will join law, I must commend your stoicism and your grit and determination and your somewhat thick-skinnedness, because you must have been faced with jibes, which incidentally jibes the legal profession faces the most, but they also, I believe, conceal admiration. You must have heard the one, of course, that law is a profession where you first get on and then get honor and then get honest in that sequence. On, honor, and honest. You must also have heard of the jibe that lawyers are the only community in the world who draft 10,000 word documents and call them a brief. Lord Brougham, a member of the House of Lords of UK, once defined or described a lawyer, quote unquote, as a learned gentleman who rescues his client's estate to keep it for himself. So if despite all these jibes or concealed admirations, as the case may be, you are still steadfast in your determination to do law, well then good luck to all of you. Let us turn to the art of advocacy, which I thought should be the main theme on which I'd address you for the next 10, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. Well, friends, the first and the most important quality, obviously, of being a practicing advocate, of course, it's equally relevant if you are a corporate lawyer, a chamber lawyer, an in-house lawyer, an advisor. Those are all very respectable, and nowadays you have umpteen more options than you had when I joined the profession. But I'm talking more of advocacy because this is a moot competition context. What is advocacy? What are its essential elements? Well, it obviously comprises a lot of elements. The first of which is to be able to put across a point in a pithy, succinct, relevant, neat, and generally in an overall pleasing manner. Pithy, succinct, relevant, neat, and pleasing manner. The French philosopher Montesquieu, in one of his essays, put it rather well. He said, and I quote him, "Every man may speak truly, but to speak methodically, prudently, and fully is a talent which few have." And I think this is the first lesson of advocacy. The second point of it is that this first lesson has to do with two concepts. The two concepts being time and language. Let's turn to time. It has been said to you repeatedly that brevity is the soul of wit. Well, this phrase is forgotten the moment a lawyer usually starts his argument, or it is remembered only when you want to stop your opponent's arguments. You must realize that brevity is the soul of wit applies to law possibly more than any other vocation. I don't know how many of you have heard the very famous story about Dr. Johnson writing to Boswell. As you know, the Johnson and Boswell exchanges are very famous. He writes in one of them, he starts the letter saying, "Dear Boswell, I am extremely sorry to write to you a long letter because I don't have the time to write a short one." Remember, it is much more difficult to speak or write pointedly, precisely, shortly. So Dr. Johnson told Boswell, "Dear Boswell, I am sorry to have to write to you a long letter because I don't have the time to write a short one." And therefore, brevity and precision, preparation, arrangement of your thoughts, and hard work all go together. It is perhaps easy to filibuster. It is perhaps easy to be merely rhetoric, but the casualty is the quality, the brevity, the precision, and the pointedness of your essay. The third one is, of course, time, as I said. That is, of course, linked to brevity. And the joke is that when a lawyer was arguing before a judge, and he went on and on and on and on arguing, a point came where he said, "I'm now just finishing, my lords. I shall not encroach more upon your time." When he finally said this, the judge could not restrain himself. The poor fellow had been listening patiently for hours and hours. So he said, "Time, Mr. Counsel? Time? Please don't worry, you are not encroaching on time. You are now encroaching on eternity." Now, lawyers must remember that it is not good advocacy to encroach or trespass on eternity. The fourth aspect of advocacy is language. To say something meaningful and to have content is no doubt important, but your command of the language is vital. And whether you like it or not, the higher judiciary in this country has largely chosen English as its vehicle of communication. I'm talking of the high courts and the Supreme Court. Of course, there are certain high courts where Hindi as a dual language is permitted, and Madhya Pradesh is one of them, Rajasthan is another. But by and large, English is the designated official language. In fact, people complain that the last greatest bastion of the English language remains the higher judiciary within India. But that is a given. That is part of the system in which you have to work. And therefore, too many liberties with the Queen's English are not permitted. to be a good advocate. In a lighter vein, let me tell you about the European Council. As you know, the European Council or the European Union is virtually one country, or was, till Britain left recently and some other countries left, but it is one country in many ways, right from the tip of England right to the Iron Curtain on the east. Well, though they have integrated a lot, the languages are different. So many decades ago, the European Council issued a small booklet to warn people against taking liberties with the English language, which I think is relevant for those practicing the art of advocacy. Two of those items in the booklet, one said that uh, in a Bulgarian zoo, obviously in Bulgaria, the facility with English language is limited. They had put up a notice to visitors saying, quote, "Do not feed animals. If you have some suitable food, give it to the guard on duty." This sounds interesting, but it is faulty English. Or they also published the example of a Greek tailor on the Greek island of Rhodes who put up a notice on the shop saying, "In times of high tourist rush, we will execute customers in strict rotation." We all know what he meant, but we also know how he put it was a very funny, humorous way of misusing the English language. The sixth aspect of advocacy is your quickness of thought, especially while you are on your feet. You will find that you have prepared well, and I am assuming that all of you will be hardworking and will prepared well. But when you're actually arguing, sometimes the questions, the interruptions, the queries, or the objections which fall from the bench are thick and fast. Quick, thick, and fast. At that time, all your preparation, which is very important and must be there, has to be combined with an ability to think on your feet and answer in a manner which is harmonious with your overall argument. Here, the ability lies in being able to imbibe quickly the query, assimilate that query, and promptly harmonize it consistently with the overall framework of your argument, so that the answer which you give on that query does not seem out of place or anomalous. Of course, a large part of this comes with experience. And let me tell you also, as a practitioner of many decades now, more cases are won or lost in the rejoinder than they are on the opening and the reply. As you know, the sequence is I open, Akshay Bam replies, and I get a rejoinder. More cases are lost and won with the precision, the accuracy of your rejoinder. And very few people realize that. And that depends a lot on the quickness of your thought process and assimilating the overall picture. The seventh aspect of advocacy, which you must all keep in mind, is that it is wrong as we think of like that, both in law and in life, and both are wrong. That life and law are black or white. In reality, just like life has large shades of grey, law has large shades of grey. Indeed, if law did not have large shades of grey, lawyers would be superfluous. And it is for you to be able to interpret those shades of grey to your benefit within a reasonable logical system, which is what singles you out as a successful advocate and lawyer. My eighth point is related to the ability to assimilate a large number of facts in a short time. As you can see, this is all focused upon mooters and upon practicing litigating lawyers. It may not be so much true for chamber lawyers or corporate lawyers. You must face it that you are not in an ideal world. When you become lawyers, you will get 500-page, 1,000-page briefs thrown onto your table the previous night. And you're lucky if they're not thrown onto your table late at night for the next day. This is especially true if you get government briefs. You're very lucky if you get the government brief for the next day before 7, 8 o'clock in the night. At that time, of course, your 24 hours or 12 hours or 15 hours notice is basically only hard work and hard work. But then also the ability to speed read And speed read is an essential self-preservation mechanism for the litigating lawyer. To be able to locate the relevant facts, you'll be astonished. We get 20 volume briefs as a miscellaneous brief in the Supreme Court because you're obliged to file, even on the first day of miscellaneous hearing for admission in the Supreme Court, everything which has been filed below. That may be 10 volumes, 20 volumes. But if you come to the heart of it, you will find that not more than 300 words spread across those 20 volumes are relevant. Not even that. The ability to speed read, to be able to locate them within a short period, is not only an element of self-preservation of a successful lawyer, but also a necessity, given the logistics of litigation. Of course, of all these 8 points, my 9th point is above all. It is higher and more important than all the earlier 8 points, and that is hard work. As we have said many times, there are substitutes for hard work, but there is no substitute for hard work. 99% is perspiration, possibly 100% is perspiration. You're lucky if 0.5% or 1% is inspiration. That may be a matter of chance, but perspiration is within your control. Let me quote to you what a very famous jurist, Joseph Story, said. It is often quoted partially, but I'll quote to you the full. He said, I will not say that law will not admit no rival, but I will say that law is a very jealous mistress and requires long and constant courtship. It is not to be won by flinging favors as you might on a mistress, but by lavish homage. Unquote. You have to give it lavish homage, and lavish homage is only 2 words: hard work. I now come to the virtual end of what I want to say as the 10th or the 11th points, which are related, which is basically your overall persona, your reputation, your integrity, your sense of fairness and balance will make your personality as a lawyer. You'll be surprised that this most unquantifiable ethic, the least measurable ethic, is possibly the most important. Over time, as little as 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, judges learn whether to trust you or not to trust you. And if to trust you, how much to trust you. When a lawyer says X, Y, Z, the judge should not need to turn to the page to cross-check him, because he knows he can rely on the accuracy and the fairness of that lawyer. This happens, of course, over time. But the more you put a judge in a position where he's to cross-check you repeatedly, the less successful as an advocate you would be. And this is your sense of not taking liberties with the truth and yet counterbalancing every facet in the best interest of your client with fairness and accuracy. And this is a unquantifiable ethic, immeasurable, which is possibly the most important over your first 5 years, your first 10 years of practice. The last, which is the 11th, is a wider issue, which again is forgotten or ignored by most people. A certain sense of idealism about the legal profession. And here I must tell you something which many of you may not have noticed, which is, what is ultimately, have you ever asked yourself the question that what is the difference between what you call a profession and a business? Why don't you call law a profession? Why don't you call law a business? Why do you call medicine a profession? It could as well be called business. Well, the answer was given by one of the most eminent jurists, Dean Roscoe Pound of Harvard Law School, many decades ago, almost 100 years ago. He said that, of course, in one sense, law is business. And today these things sound very idle because you have law as business everywhere. But there are 3 elements which are peculiar to a profession. And this applies to all professions, which distinguish it from business. And you must not forget those. One element, he said, is the organization. So that's why law profession developed around guilds. you had guilds. Is the equivalent of gurukuls, around whom students learnt at the feet of a master. That's true of almost all professions, be it medicine, be it law, be it architecture. So, organization. Business doesn't need that. Business needs entrepreneurship, dynamism, risk taking. It doesn't need an organized guild. Second, a sense of learning. A businessman to be successful doesn't have to have a BA or a BCom. Why is it necessary for you to have an LLB or an LLM or a doctor to have an MBBS? Because you are deemed to be a learned professional. Learning, your 5 years of investment, your 3 years of investment, your 7 years of investment. A businessman, theoretically, Bill Gates was successful when he dropped out and started Microsoft in his 20s. But he could not have become a lawyer unless he had wasted 5 more years. That's the sense of learning. Third, he said, is above all a spirit of public service. Now, this sounds very hollow in current times where everything is commercialized. But public service is an idea linked to professions, where it is prettily summed up that you are paid so that you can serve. You don't serve so that you are paid. Of course, a doctor has to be paid, otherwise, he can't survive. But the essential quality of a doctor is that he has to heal. Payment is a consequence and inevitable corollary of that healing process. Similarly, lawyers are supposed to be essentially dispute resolvers, healers in their own way, adjudicators or assistants to adjudicators, judges, where the principal object is not only earning money, but to provide a service to society, because without law and judges, there would be anarchy. So these three elements which distinguish a profession from a business must be remembered by all of you as students. Otherwise, it all sounds very rhetorical and empty and hollow when you say legal ethics. Sound like an oxymoron. Well, friends, let's end on a lighter note. I think there are some witticisms about law which you should not live up to. For example, Will Rogers said, the minute you read something which you cannot understand, you can safely assume that it is drafted by a lawyer. Or Mr. Murray said that a lawyer will do anything to win a case. Sometimes he will even tell the truth. These witticisms should not deter you. Jeremy Bentham, a great philosopher, put it nicely, humorously, when he said, lawyers are the only person in whom ignorance of the law is not punished. As you know, ignorance of the law is no defense for the common man. But what you should aspire to be is as what Sir Walter Scott said. And he said, quote, and that is the lawyer plus I want to comment upon as I end. A lawyer without history or literature is a mere mechanic or a mere working mason. If he possesses some of these, namely history and literature, then he may venture to call himself an architect. That is what the roundedness and the fullness is what all the competitors in the moot court should aspire to. You, of course, know the 7 lamps of advocacy. I'll not repeat them. Apart from the essential characteristics I have highlighted, the 7 lamps of advocacy include honesty. Uprightness, integrity, and honesty of an advocate will be important in his profession. Second is courage, boldness, bold, bold, and bold, 3 B's, to take up unpopular causes, without fear of unpleasant consequences. Otherwise, what is a lawyer? He's an activist. Third is industry. I have told you about Harvard and hard work. Success in advocacy is not by intuition or inspiration. Fourth is wit, which I have explained to you. Fifth is eloquence, which I have explained to you. Sixth is judgment, balance, to come to a sensible conclusion within the limitations of your brief. And the last, which is forgotten again, is the lamp of fellowship. The lamp of fellowship arises from the concept of this profession as a guild. It means the membership in friendly association or companionship. Shakespeare put it well, he said, Do as adversaries do in law. And adversaries in law fight like gladiators. But he said, he added, strive mightily, but eat and drink as a friend, which is what we do when we go out after fighting each other and sit and have coffee in the canteen. Thank you very much.